Like the Federal Reserve System, the Congress has been further distorting the letter of its constitutional responsibilities by delegating its power to declare war to another entity, in this case, the President.
One of the great problems the country faces is the cowardice of the Congress of the United States as an institution. It has allowed the President to usurp the war-making power.
Where does Congress get authority to delegate the responsibility to declare war to the President? It's not in the Constitution. This delegation sounds more like an evasion of responsibility for political expediency than the original intent of the founders.
It has resigned its authority. It is frightened of exercising its authority. It does not want responsibility. It does not want accountability.
Article 1, Section 8 clearly states, Congress shall have power to declare war, to raise and support armies, to provide and maintain a navy, to provide for calling forth the militia.
People such as George Washington, Nathaniel Greene, the leaders of the Army, didn't think much of the militia. The militia came for 30, 60, 90, 180 days, and then when their enlistment time ran out, they went home. They didn't have to stay. They came with sort of an oddment of firearms. Typically, they were firearms that didn't entirely fit the Army pattern. They had different calibers, logistics problems arose. The men weren't clearly not as well trained as the regular soldiers. They had a tendency to break when the British charged them with bayonets, for instance. So people like Washington, who was obviously very influential at the time, didn't have a particularly good word to say about the militia. So one would have thought when the Constitution was drafted, the Founding Fathers would have left the militia out. We don't need this. Hadn't proven to be that effective. Or they might have said, well, Congress or the states can set up a militia if they want to, but it's discretionary. Depends on circumstances. They did the exact opposite. They recognized the existence of what they called the militia of the several states at the time. It's constitutionally recognized. And then the Second Amendment comes along and says it's necessary to the security of a free state. So I would say the Constitution makes it absolutely clear that those entities, because there's not one entity, that should be one in every one of the states, is a key structural element of the Constitution. And why? Well, it's because ultimately, who's the militia? It's the people.
With every shooting on a college campus, the cultural Marxist indoctrinating mainstream media never mentions the true source of the problem, the disintegration of the family unit. Instead, the media pushes the socialist agenda of removing citizens' Second Amendment rights.
Let's go to the Second Amendment, which says a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. The right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. Just take the first clause. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. Stop right there. That's the only place in the Constitution where the Constitution says that anything is necessary for any reason. The Constitution doesn't say Congress is necessary, the President's necessary, the Supreme Court is necessary. It doesn't even say the states are necessary. It says a well-regulated militia is necessary to what? To the security. Well, not just any kind of security, but the security of a free state. And that's the sole purpose of the Constitution in toto.
The way that the United States was set up originally was that the defense of the nation was to be primarily the responsibility of the states. They were to create militia drawn upon able-bodied American citizens within the state. They were to provide their weapons and their training and their leaders. They were to form into a national fighting force, and they would defend the borders of the United States against foreign enemies. But the primary foundation, the element of that, was the militia.
Never stated in movies like Bowling for Columbine, movies funded by cultural Marxist-infiltrated Hollywood studios, is the original intent of the founders that all citizens retain the right to keep and bear arms. More accurately, the obligation to keep and bear arms as part of the militia.
The Michigan militia wanted everyone to know that they were nothing like McVeigh and Nichols.
This is an American tradition. It's an American responsibility to be armed.
I'm sure you guys are the kind of people that people would like to have as their neighbor.
As the Constitution tells us, a well-regulated militia is necessary to the security of a free state. Now, some people may disagree with that, and my response is, well, that's a personal opinion. The law is otherwise. Right? The law tells us that this is the principle on which we're supposed to be operating. You don't like that, amend it. If it's there, enforce it. If you don't enforce it, there will be some consequence, because the Constitution is, how should I put this? It's an integrated document in the sense that all of the parts were designed to function with all of the others simultaneously. And if you look at it, there are several pillars to it. There's, of course, the federal government, the Congress, President, and the Supreme Court. There are the states. There are the people as electors. And then there's this group of entities called the militia. And read the Constitution through and you'll see they're essentially all on an equal plane. They all fit into this structure. Well, if an architect designs a building with 5 support columns, it's probably because he believes every one of those is necessary. You knock one of those out or you allow it to decay, and you can pretty much expect that that building is not going to be stable over the long term. Certain kinds of shocks affect it, it's going to come down. Same thing with a governmental structure. Governmental structure was designed in such a way that the people were supposed to play an important role in maintaining political power of military force.
Instead, the Frankfurt School's agenda of injecting cultural pessimism into society continues. Robberies, murder, fires, and now escalating school shootings all contribute to the cultural pessimism and the misguided justification of disarming the citizens. But if citizens ever allow cultural Marxists, such as the Michael Moores of the world, to ban ownership of guns, they will make a grave mistake.
These guys that created the American Constitution, the American Republic, were looking into the future, and they were concerned about our own government becoming despotic. They could see that. They talked about the possibility of that. How do we prevent that from happening was a major issue of discussion. And they said one of the ways is to make sure that we don't give them a standing army, and the other way is to make sure that the local population was armed. Because if you've got every man, able-bodied man in the country, and women too, armed and knowing how to use a weapon and under training and with their local squad leaders and so forth, their own commanders, there's no government that's in the United States that's going to turn against them. So they were very wise. And today, people laugh at that concept, but now that we're losing our liberties, I think the laughter is dying down pretty rapidly.
By order of the City of Pittsburgh Chief Police, I hereby declare this to be an unlawful assembly. I order all those assembled to immediately disperse. You must leave the immediate vicinity. If you remain in this immediate vicinity, you will be in violation of the Pennsylvania Crimes Code. If you do not disperse, you may be arrested and or subject to other police action. I order all those assembled to immediately disperse. You must leave the immediate vicinity. If you remain in this immediate vicinity, you will be in violation of the Pennsylvania Crimes Code, no matter what your purpose is.
Observing thousands of years of history of earlier governments, the founders knew that the only thing that ultimately stands between a tyrannical government and the people are weapons.
Quoting Mao Zedong, who in this case agrees with the Second Amendment, political power grows out of the barrel of a gun. Where the source of political power is to be is where the gun is. Ultimately, that's the bottom line of force in government, right? That's what government is, the application of force. If the application of force is given to some elite group, they're in control. If the application of force is given to the people, they're in control. If you want a free state, a self-governing state where we the people do the ordaining and establishing, who has to control the ultimate body of force? It's the people themselves. And that's not a professional army. That's not a standing army. That's something the Founding Fathers were very much concerned about. They didn't want a standing army.
They thought that a standing army was perhaps one of the most dangerous things you can imagine, because if Washington, D.C., they said if they were to have a standing army, you know what they're going to do with it? They're going to use it. going to use it for something. If you get a bunch of soldiers sitting around training, you're going to use them. And they didn't want that, except in a defensive mode.
If people read the Constitution, that it's not in a time of war you have a standing army. When there's no war, you have to abolish the standing army within 18 months. You can have a navy, but no standing army.
Also, never forget the instrument that literally authorized the U.S. Constitution and freed all Americans from oppressive European rule was the Declaration of Independence. This sister document states that whenever any form of government becomes destructive of certain ends, such as the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, it is the duty of the people to alter or abolish it. Alter it means to vote out those who aren't following the Constitution. If such politicians, over time, or unbeknownst to the people, reconfigure the government in such a way as to usurp the rights of the people, then the only choice left is to abolish the government.
So they were acting within the law when they stood on that green, and they believed that General Gage was outside the law. He was an outlaw, that regular army. And that's why they didn't throw down their arms that day. And they opened fire on him.
Now, one doesn't like to think of that as being something that we want to face here in this country, but there are many other problems prior to that that the militia would deal with. And a large militia structure would have a terrific deterrent effect on any people in political life that had aspirations to become usurpers or tyrants. It's pretty hard to overcome a country when 60 or 70% of the people are organized, armed, and trained.
The Second Amendment states that the people, as and through their militia, have the right to keep and bear arms, and this right shall not be infringed.
As individuals have rights, and we grant the government privileges. Those privileges are listed in Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution, and anytime we have a justifiable reason and the courage to do so, we can revoke those rights and take those privileges away from the government.
This means that a well-regulated militia consisting of the people, not some distant bunch of federal professionals, has the right to keep and bear, meaning own and keep on their person, guns and arms, short for armaments. These armaments are for use should the people, through their constitutional militia, find it necessary to abolish a tyrannical and suppressive government and replace it with a serving government that promotes the general welfare and secures the blessings of liberty.